You feel drained, but not because something is missing. In fact, your life is overflowing with notifications, content, decisions, opinions. You are surrounded by more convenience, information, and freedom than any generation in history. And yet, you feel hollow, like you're starving in a room full of food no one taught you how to digest. The world tells you this should feel like a gift. You can be anything, do anything, choose anything. But instead of feeling empowered, you feel paralyzed, anxious, spiritually malnourished. You don't even know what you're hungry for anymore. You just know that nothing you consume seems to reach the part of you that's actually starving. And when you try to express this emptiness, people brush it off. They say you're overthinking. They tell you to just be grateful. But gratitude doesn't fix the ache you feel in the silence between distractions. It doesn't answer the gnawing question in the back of your mind. If I have everything, why do I still feel like nothing? The truth is, you're not suffering because you lack something. You're suffering because you're drowning in too much. Too much noise, too much choice, too much freedom without meaning. You were told that more would make you whole, more freedom, more options, more stimulation. But you weren't warned that abundance has a shadow side, that when everything is possible, nothing feels necessary, that too many choices don't liberate you, they disorient you. Byung-Chul Han calls this the violence of positivity. In a culture where nothing is impossible, failure becomes a personal shame, rest becomes guilt, and meaning dissolves into optimization. He writes, "The complaint of the depressed individual, nothing is possible, can only occur in a society that believes nothing is impossible." In other words, when you are told you can have everything, you begin to fear that you are the reason you feel nothing. Your exhaustion is not laziness. It's the weight of carrying 1,000 invisible decisions every day that never resolve into anything real. It's the spiritual erosion that happens when everything around you demands your attention but offers no anchor. You live in a hyper-connected world yet feel increasingly untethered from yourself. This is the paradox. The more freedom you're given without structure, the more you collapse inward. Because you were not made for infinite possibilities. You were made for purposeful limitation, ritual, meaning, depth. But your culture taught you to flee limits. It taught you that boundaries are cages and that freedom means escaping from everything, including yourself. But what if it's not the limits that suffocate you? What if it's the lack of meaning behind your freedom that's starving your soul? Viktor Frankl once warned that modern people are not crushed by suffering, they are crushed by meaninglessness. In a world where freedom has become the highest good, we have forgotten that freedom without direction is not liberation. It is disintegration. Freedom, Frankl wrote in Man's Search for Meaning, is only part of the story and half of the truth. Freedom is but the negative aspect of the whole, whose positive aspect is responsibleness. Responsibility, a word that sounds heavy but may be the very thing your soul craves. Because when everything is optional, nothing feels sacred. When every value is customizable, you begin to wonder if anything is real. You float, not because you are free, but because there is no gravity left to pull you towards something worth serving. Byung-Chul Han, in The Burnout Society, diagnoses this as the sickness of a culture obsessed with achievement and possibility. We are no longer oppressed by outside forces, he says, we are self-exploiting. We chase efficiency and choice in every corner of our lives, but never stop to ask, to what end? We become both master and slave, caught in a cycle of optimizing ourselves to death. Erich Fromm saw this too. In Escape from Freedom, he argued that as traditional structures collapsed, modern individuals gained formal freedom but lost inner grounding. We became anxious, disconnected, vulnerable to authoritarianism and numbness. Modern man, he wrote, is free from the bonds which tied him to pre-individualistic society, but he has not gained freedom in the positive sense of the realization of the individual self. And Søren Kierkegaard, long before all of them, named this feeling the dizziness of freedom, the anxiety that emerges when one is forced to confront infinite possibility without moral anchoring. He believed despair arises not from external lack, but from failing to become oneself. The more you avoid that confrontation, the more fragmented you become. And so, in a tragic irony, the culture that promised to liberate you from suffering has merely freed you into disorientation. What these thinkers knew, what you may be sensing in your own body, is that meaning does not come from endless options. It comes from voluntary limitation, from choosing something and letting it matter. Your pain isn't just personal, It's philosophical, psychological, cultural. And the worst thing you can do is try to numb it, because underneath the numbness is the signal. You're being starved of meaning in a world obsessed with more. The culture you live in is not neutral. It is engineered to keep you consuming, not just products, but identities, lifestyles, even emotions. You are not asked to become yourself. You are asked to become desirable, marketable, efficient, and worst of all, endlessly dissatisfied. Look around. Every ad promises fulfillment. Every app whispers possibility. Every screen offers stimulation, but nothing ever settles. The moment you begin to feel full, the next offering appears. New content, new goals, new aesthetics of self. It is an economy of attention and emptiness, and your soul is its most valuable currency. Jean Baudrillard saw it clearly. He wrote that we have replaced reality with simulation. We no longer seek truth, we seek performance. Experience becomes image, connection becomes content, even pain becomes something to brand. In this hyper-reality, the substance of life is flattened into spectacle, and you, the individual, are reduced to a consumer of meaning you didn't create. But the tragedy runs deeper. The system doesn't just sell you things, it sells you the idea that your emptiness is a personal failure, that if you don't feel alive, you simply haven't optimized hard enough, haven't meditated right, haven't hustled correctly, haven't done enough inner work, self-care, or manifestation. This is the myth of self-responsibilization. If you are suffering, it must be because you're not trying hard enough to be happy. But happiness in this context has been hollowed out. It no longer means wholeness. It means productivity, visibility, the ability to present your life as aspirational, even if you're crumbling inside. And in this illusion, no one wins, because even those who achieve the dream discover it was built on sand. You were not designed to process this much stimulation. You were not meant to scroll through hundreds of lives before bed. You were not supposed to hold a supercomputer of distraction in your palm, and yet you blame yourself for feeling fragmented. What if the disconnection you feel is not a bug, but a feature? What if the burnout, the numbness, the inner void are the natural outcomes of a system that profits from your emptiness? You cannot heal in a culture that is actively invested in keeping you hungry. But once you see the machine, you can begin to step outside of it. And to do that, we need to understand something deeper, where this starvation truly begins. And for that, we have to look at your biology, your development. The child inside you didn't just disappear, it adapted, it survived, and it's still asking to be seen. Long before you knew how to name it, you felt it. The subtle ache, the restlessness, the quiet fear that if you stopped performing, you would disappear. This wasn't a thought, it was a bodily truth, etched into your nervous system like a survival code. Because the world didn't first wound you with chaos, it wounded you with emptiness, with emotional unavailability, with unpredictable love, with 1,000 silent moments where your basic need, to be seen and accepted without condition, went unmet. That was the moment you learned the strategy that defines most adult suffering. If I'm not enough on my own, I must become whatever they need me to be. You stopped asking to be held. You started overachieving. You became exceptional, not because you felt whole, but because it gave you something to stand on. And biologically, this adaptation makes sense. When a child experiences inconsistent care, the body wires itself for hypervigilance. The nervous system begins scanning constantly. Am I doing enough? Am I too much? Am I safe yet? The emptiness becomes internalized, and life turns into a performance for worth. As adults, we rarely recognize this. We just call it ambition, discipline, or being a high achiever. But underneath the productivity is panic. Underneath the perfectionism is a child still trying to earn the love they never believed they deserved by simply existing. Alain Ehrenberg, in The Weariness of the Self, describes modern depression not as a failure of energy, but as a collapse of identity under the weight of limitless expectation. When you are expected to be your own project, your own savior, your own brand, eventually the psyche fractures. You are no longer living. You are maintaining the illusion of being fine. But healing does not begin by striving harder. It begins by listening to the body that was trained to never rest, to the breath that's always shallow, to the chest that tightens whenever you do nothing. That tightening is not laziness, it's grief. It's the emotional debris of a nervous system that was never given permission to just be. So many of the modern pathologies, burnout, anxiety, shame, addiction, are not signs of weakness. They are symptoms of a life lived out of sync with human need. and no amount of content or coping hacks will repair what was damaged in silence. To move forward, you must acknowledge this. You're not just mentally tired, you're developmentally hungry. Hungry for depth, for stillness, for internal safety that isn't conditional on achievement. But the modern world cannot feed this. That nourishment must come from somewhere else. And it begins where all things begin, with the child inside of you, still waiting, still asking, am I allowed to stop performing now? There comes a moment, quiet, unglamorous, when the old methods stop working, when another late-night scroll leaves you emptier than before, when the praise that once lit you up now feels hollow, when achieving the thing doesn't quiet the ache. It's not dramatic, it's slow, it's waking up with everything and still feeling like nothing. It's watching yourself play the role perfectly and feeling like a ghost inside your own life. This is the breakdown point. The moment where your nervous system, your soul, your very being begins to whisper what you've spent years silencing. I can't keep doing this. And the tragedy? You've done everything right. You optimized. You manifested. You read the books. You outperformed your pain. You built a life others envy, but now the scaffolding is shaking, and you don't know who you are without the mask of being fine. Viktor Frankl warned us this would happen. When freedom is no longer tied to purpose, it collapses into chaos. When suffering has no meaning, it becomes unbearable. When your identity is rooted only in outcomes, you are one failure away from emotional collapse. But modern culture doesn't tell you how to feel this. It tells you to fix it. Buy a new course. Find a new partner. Hack your routine. Anything but sit in the stillness and ask, why am I starving in a world full of everything? Because if you did, you'd see it clearly. Your emptiness is not failure. It is evidence. Evidence that you were built for more than consumption. Evidence that your soul is not satisfied by pixels, performance, or productivity. And yet, here you are, face to face with the void, terrified that if you stop, you'll fall apart. But what if falling apart isn't the problem? What if it's the beginning? Because there is a version of you that doesn't need the mask. A self that doesn't measure worth in metrics. A path that begins not in striving, but in surrender. But to walk it, you'll have to face the part you've spent your whole life avoiding. The part that hurts. The part that remembers. And that's exactly what we'll face next. This is where it begins. Not with a new plan, but with an old truth rediscovered. You were never meant to outrun your emptiness. You were meant to listen to it. Because emptiness, when faced with honesty, becomes instruction. It reveals where you abandoned yourself in favor of what the world rewarded. You do not need another dopamine spike. You need a sacred rhythm, one that honors slowness as a form of resistance, one that treats boredom not as failure, but as a portal back to your internal life. Byung-Chul Han wrote that we live in a society allergic to stillness, one that fears non-productivity as weakness, because in silence we are forced to confront the unbearable truth. Most of what we chase doesn't satisfy us, and the constant chase becomes the very thing that starves us. To rebuild, you must reject this rhythm, not loudly, not rebelliously, but quietly, intentionally, sacredly. This is the new form of strength, to reclaim responsibility for your own attention, to choose depth over novelty, to sit with a book instead of a scroll, to walk slowly instead of racing toward a goal, to create a life with so much presence that your nervous system finally stops bracing for impact. The return begins here, in rituals of silence, in the courage to do nothing and still feel worthy, in saying no, not to punish, but to protect. Kierkegaard wrote, "The greatest hazard of all, losing oneself, can occur so quietly that it is almost like not losing anything at all." And that is exactly how it happened. You didn't lose yourself in one moment. You leaked away, one compromise, one distraction, one emotional contortion at a time. But here, in the aftermath, you begin again. Not by becoming someone new, but by unbecoming everything that was survival. This is what it means to rebuild, to embrace responsibility as nourishment, not as pressure, to choose meaning as your compass, not consumption, to find joy in devotion, not variety. Viktor Frankl taught that man's deepest need is not happiness, but purpose. And purpose is not discovered, it is chosen. Chosen every time you say, I will no longer be owned by what I consume. I will no longer perform my worth. I will be here, fully. Let the world spin. Let the noise pass. You are no longer starving because you are no longer outsourcing your soul. If something stirred in you while listening to this, it wasn't just the words. It was the part of you that remembers who you were before the noise, before the pressure, before you learned to confuse success with safety or productivity with purpose. That part of you is still here, still waiting, not to be improved, not to be fixed, but to be fed with stillness, with depth, with truth. You don't need to become anything else. You need to return to what you already are, whole, worthy, and already enough. So if this message resonated, write in the comments, "I will no longer starve my soul." Let it be a ritual, a vow, a simple act of rebellion against a world that profits from your emptiness. And if you feel the pull to go deeper, don't stop here. The next video will take you further into the truths we were never taught to name. It's not about watching more, it's about remembering more. Your soul is not too much, it is hungry and ready to be fed.